Welcome to Customer Service Academy Radio with author and customer experience expert Tony Johnson. Tony will share his vision for successful customer service, leadership, and business excellence, and speak to some of the most impactful leaders in business today. And now, here's Tony Johnson.
Hello, everybody. Customer Service Academy is on the air. I'm Tony Johnson, your customer experience speaker, consultant, and trainer. Today's episode coming to you courtesy of Ignite Your Service Training and Consulting and 4XI Global Consulting and Solutions. Truly better together. Folks, there is a great new product out there I want to call attention to. If you head on over to 4xi360.com/diagnostics, and I will put the link down in the show notes for that, you'll be able to take a restaurant assessment. It is a high-value restaurant assessment to learn where you stand in the marketplace, to learn what your customers are saying and what your competition is doing, as well as, wait for this, a roadmap to improve. So if you want some transparency and visibility into your restaurant operations, head on over and check that out today. That's 4xi360.com/diagnostics, and the link will be in the show notes. So as I'm recording this, we are sitting right on the cusp of America's 250th birthday. 1776 to present, John Adams and Washington and Jefferson, the whole kit and caboodle, the whole bit, the Revolutionary War, our birthday is right around the corner. So as we're recording this right at this moment, we are just a couple of days away from the 4th of July, from Independence Day, and that big 250th birthday. So, a lot's happening. Celebrations are kicking off. The FIFA World Cup is happening, and there is just a ton going on. And this is a time, I think, to really sit here with that for a minute, right? 2.5 centuries. It's a long time. It's a time to sort of be humbled by that. And I know as countries go, we're sort of young, right? We're sort of still young and a little bit idealistic, and maybe still some of the upstarts, because there are obviously countries that have been around for millennia, for just forever, right, compared to us. That said, though, it's an interesting time to reflect. And it's an interesting time to think about a journey of excellence and innovation and what's around the corner. And I think back, if you think back to the 1800s, right, the American West, that was when the whole idea of hospitality and experience really started to be born. But it was different then. If you think about what we experience as travel now, and we complain about airlines and the like, think about being a passenger, getting off and getting just greasy slop on dirty plates by someone who doesn't care. Now, I know there are probably still restaurants that would qualify as that, but really, You've got to get off. You got to find something that's not going to make you sick. No one's going to care. It's probably overpriced for what it is, and you got to hurry because you don't want to miss your train because the stop's probably 4 or 5 minutes long, right? That was service once upon a time, and it wasn't about, were you going to get a good experience? Was it going to be memorable? It was going to be, am I going to miss my train and get stuck? Am I going to get sick or die from this food? Is this food fresh? These are things you really had to worry about, because the whole idea of food safety is a relatively new one in the history of restaurants. So it was a whole different ball of wax. And the reason I bring this up is one of our core things we're going to talk about today are what I like to call the titans of hospitality. We're going to talk about the folks that got us there, the folks that helped us move forward from that picture I just painted you to where we are today. And so the reason that I bring this journey of excellence up is because if not for the folks I'm going to mention, we would not be here, right? Again, it's a journey of excellence, and it hasn't been a straight line, and it's never going to be finished. But this moving target is something that probably everyone on this podcast, everyone listening, is probably searching for, because we are all about experience. We are all about hospitality, all about leading people and teams and driving success. And the word for this show, evolving. American hospitality's never stood still, has it? If you think about it, every generation, everyone looked at it and said, it's not good enough. We're going to do better, and we're going to figure it out. We're going to push, and we're going to push, and we're going to make the generation before us crazy about it, but we're going to push because we're relentless. And we're going to push because we're relentless and we're restless and we refuse. And that's sort of the American inheritance when it comes to hospitality. So again, that's our key word, evolving, and the fact that we just can't sit still. And that's going to be what we talk about today. So if the hospitality keeps climbing, we need to understand what that means to keep up with our guests, with our customers, with our consumers, and continue to evolve. And this is going to be the through line for the whole episode, right, is this evolution of hospitality and service. So I want you to think about this. We started off as a commodity. That was where service started. That was where the whole idea of business started, right, was a commodity. So let's take coffee, right? You take the coffee, you sell the beans, It's a commodity pricing, kind of everyone's selling it for the same price basically, and off you go, and that's it, right? And then you maybe move into goods, right? So you make it. Maybe you roast it or you grind it, you bag the beans, you give them some instructions on what to do with them, and it's worth a little bit more, right? Because you've taken a step. And then you start to get into some service. So you deliver it. Somebody brews that coffee. Somebody hands it to you. Maybe they smiled a little bit. Maybe there was someplace to sit while you drank it. So it's worth even a little more now. And then kind of where we're living right now is this experience economy. So you stage it. So it's the Starbucks of things. It's a music and a nice table and Wi-Fi and all the things that wrap around that cup of coffee to make it a little bit better, right? So you're competing on experience, not just on the actual cup of coffee. So it is a really, really big piece and a huge evolution if you think about it. From service to experience was a big one. And what's next? Transformation, which we're going to talk about later. They call that a tease, folks. That's really where we start to have another big leap potentially. But again, if you think about this example, same beans, the difference isn't the coffee, it's what was around it. It's what wrapped around it. So let's bring this back to what we're going to talk about today, right? We had to get there. The best operators in our history, they didn't stumble up this ladder. They designed it on the way up. They practiced, they made mistakes, they tried new things, they innovated, and then they ended up getting to where we are today. And we're standing on their backs. We're standing on their shoulders. We got there because of them. And so that's why I really think this is a great time, thinking about our 250th birthday, to talk about these titans. So let's talk about these folks. And one of them, actually two of them, I discovered not too long ago, just about a year and a half ago or so, I discovered the first two on the list. So the first one was Fred Harvey. Remember how I talked to you about that opening scene, right? The train ride and am I going to get sick, that kind of thing. So that was really where Fred Harvey comes in, right? In the 1870s. Railroad dining, Grand Canyon hospitality, that was Fred Harvey. And so what he did was he brought standardized excellence into the frontier. He took the slop at that depot and he built Harvey houses where you would get clean linen, real china, fresh food, and he had these 4-minute service time things that he did so that they were timed to train stops so you wouldn't miss your train. And these were the standards that everybody held. And he brought this sense of civility, of hospitality to the frontier. And he was the first person, again, to standardize excellence across a lot of different units. So from Kansas to Arizona, it wasn't just his personality. It wasn't just his ideas. It was a system, and he was able to execute on it. And every multi-unit brand that promises the same experience, every franchisee, whether they know Fred Harvey or not, they're running his playbook. And I will tell you, I did not know about Fred Harvey until I went out and took the Grand Canyon Railroad and went out and stayed at the rim of the Grand Canyon. And his history is deep there. His name is there on the company that runs it. Xanterra is the name of the company out there that runs it. And his name is all over a lot of different things there. And that is Deep Blue, a big part of that. Now, he could not have been so successful if he didn't have a chief architect named Mary Coulter. So she designed for a sense of place. Now, if Harvey designed the service, Mary Coulter designed what happened around it. So the Hopi House, Desert View on the Grand Canyon rim, and where I discovered Mary Coulter was Hermit's Rest. So there is still a homage to her at Hermit's Rest at the Grand Canyon. And these buildings felt like they had been there for 1,000 years. This is what she did really, really well, right? She would design buildings that were more modern, that had the amenities folks needed and things like that, but they looked like they'd been there forever. And she would do things like rub soot on a brand new fireplace to age it. She would hide the steel frame inside a stone tower. So you might think it was held up by stones and things, but there was actually a support system in there. And she wrote the manual. She wrote the backstory for every building that she designed. So there's no accidents. The details were staged, they were arranged, and they were super, super intentional. So, in today, if you see these immersive environments, the Disneys and the Universals, every hotel lobby maybe that does this kind of thing, that's Mary Coulter's blueprint. And she is the proof that design is not accidental. It is okay to have service scripts. It's okay to script the whole environment. And this is why I wanted to make sure I mentioned her, because we would have none of this idea of sense of place if not for Mary Coulter, if not telling a story with location. So I wanted to make sure we mentioned her. And again, just discovered these two titans just about a year and a half ago when we visited the Grand Canyon. And it was really great to meet them in person, if you will. The next one's Howard Johnson. So Howard Johnson brings us into the kind of the 1900s to the mid 1900s, kind of pre to post World War II. It's the rise of the American road trip. So if you think about it, after World War II, the highway system came in, people started to travel, the suburbs started to become a thing. And Howard Johnson brought a promise. So Howard Johnson brought these orange roofs that you could spot from the highway, 28 flavors of ice cream and food that you could count on. And a family traveling in a strange town in the 1950s knew that roof and knew what they meant. So this was, again, about consistency. It was about knowing that there was going to be something out there for you. It wasn't having to rely on, am I going to pass something? It was about knowing that if you saw the orange roof, if you followed the roadside maps that let you know where the Howard Johnsons were, that orange roof was a promise. It was predictability, and it was care, and it was a sense of home when you were away from home. So it was one of those things you could take with you. It's sort of the modern equivalent of being able to find a McDonald's in about every country you can go to. And every brand standard out there, every spec book, this is how we do it. In fact, the idea of the success of McDonald's and all of these kind of things is really due to Howard Johnson and the fact that franchising became very popular because it helped folks know what they could expect. It was never a gamble, and it was always about trust. The next person, Conrad Hilton. Now, this is about scaling trust, the birth of a modern hotel company. So hotels, in the early Hilton days, these were local one-off things. There were no standards. You didn't know when you walked into. There were no Red Roof Inns. There were no, Marriotts. There were no Hilton Garden Inns. What we take for granted right now of being able to look at all these different hotel options and knowing that, roughly speaking, a Courtyard Marriott is a Courtyard Marriott is a Courtyard Marriott, or a Hilton is a Hilton is a Hilton, those kind of things. And that just didn't exist, when Conrad started this. And by the way, that is why there is a Conrad Hilton, and that is why it is one of their most upscale properties, right? Named for the founder. So again, he took this local one-off gamble thing and made it a name you could trust in a city you'd never visited. And when this started, hotels weren't as clean as they are now. And I know there's always quibbles about hotel cleanliness and things like that. But when you walked into a Hilton, you knew that the sheets had been changed. You knew that the place had been cleaned. You knew that you were getting a certain level of service behind the counter and that your car was going to be safe in the parking lot and all the things that maybe you wouldn't know if you stayed at a local bed and breakfast or someone who rented out a room or a local hotel. You just didn't know what you were getting. But Conrad Hilton decided there needed to be standards and it needed to be a designed experience. So the hospitality needed to scale in his mind without losing its soul. It couldn't be cookie cutter, but it also couldn't be haphazard. So it was about being intentional about the standard, systematizing the back of house, and then that allowed the front of house to really shine because they were running the playbook with enough room on the dance floor for their folks to have a little bit of personality. And so this becomes what we know today as the branded hospitality economy. I live in the center of Hospitality 101, right in Central Florida, right in tourism capital. So this is something really important to where I live and something really important to the economy and social structure here is this idea of branded hospitality. And so things like loyalty programs, you know what you get when you walk in. Hilton showed that you could provide trust that could be franchised without becoming too vanilla. And so that was his big thing. So shout out to Conrad Hilton. And again, I'm a loyal Hilton guy from way back. So a special thanks for me. Walt Disney, coming in the 50s. So the theme park as a totally designed environment. Now, we know that Disney did not invent the theme park. He borrowed heavily from Tivoli Gardens. He was probably also very influenced by Mary Coulter and this sense of design. But what he did do was bring it to the U.S. And he was so sick and tired of the little seedy fairs and circuses he would take his kids to. He really wanted some place where he could take them and have a good experience and the parents could have fun too. And that was really the soul that he wrapped around building Disneyland. So he wanted to build this stage, he thought, where everyone was a cast member. Because remember, Disney was a movie guy. So he really wanted to make sure that everyone was on stage. They were cast members, not employees. And he thought about things like, how long will someone carry trash before they drop it? That was important to him because every place he went, from a standpoint of going to a fair or a circus, they were always filthy dirty. And so he wanted to make sure that this was not that, and that every sightline was choreographed so the magic wasn't broken. He built up hills and berms around the outside of Disneyland so you couldn't see the Anaheim, outside the bubble, if you will. And that was really important to him. The other thing that he taught us, and you'll see this in a lot of design now, is this idea of having a weenie in every area. So a piece of infrastructure or architecture that you can see from really anywhere in the park, and it will orient you so that you know where you are. So for example, the castle at Disneyland, castle at Magic Kingdom, the Epcot Ball, Spaceship Earth, the Tower of Terror at Hollywood Studios, these are all what he would call a weenie. The Tree of Life and Animal Kingdom, you can look at that pretty much from anywhere in the park and get a sense of where you are, and so that you can find your way through the park very easily. And this idea of kind of hub and spoke, a central area where you walk into a theme park and everything branches off, that's a Disney thing. He got some of these ideas from Tivoli Gardens, and he amplified them and made them his own. So this is really probably the purest extension of what we're talking about today. Nothing he did was an accident. On stage, backstage, cast members, work was literally a theater. And this really starts to bring us to the through line of an experience fully realized. This is where American hospitality probably reached the top ladder and planted a flag in this Hilton Disney era, is really where it happened. And when you hear folks say, we're in the experience business, we're building immersive experiences, they are absolutely echoing Walt Disney and to some extent Conrad Hilton. So the next one I want to talk about is Truett Cathy as we continue on our journey of Titans. And he proved that values could be an operating system. I mean, when you think about having this idea of saying my pleasure instead of you're welcome or no problem, being closed on Sundays and still finding a way to be one of the highest performing chains in the country and one of the fastest growing and doing it on a 6-day week, that's a very important piece. And it's important to note that, even their tagline, we didn't invent the chicken, we invented the chicken sandwich, right? I mean, fried chicken was not a new thing when Cathy started this game, but he proved that a menu that was well executed, a menu that was consistent, a menu that was just the right size could absolutely bring value to the American consumer. And I've said it 100 times, I have all the respect in the world for Chick-fil-A. They don't have the best chicken sandwich, but what they have is a very good chicken sandwich every single time I go in there. It's not a D one time and an A plus the next and an F the time after that and then a C and then a B. It's always a B plus, A minus chicken sandwich. It's always fresh, it's always pretty good, and it's certainly always served quickly and with a high degree of hospitality. And he proved that culture could be an operating system, not just a slogan. So Chick-fil-A does an amazing job, I'm going to say it again, an amazing job of hiring for character, of training their team. They put the right people on the ground. They put the right operators in there. They hire the right team members, and they have a system that really values warmth. They build values into their model. It's not just a mission statement. It's how they do things. And it's proof that hospitality and business results don't have to be a trade-off, right? So that warmth can scale when you're intentional about it, when you prioritize it, because they go to great lengths to make sure they have the right team on the ground when they're selecting their operator partners, when they hire their frontline employees, when they think about the service experience, the people they put in the drive-through. This is how they run an excellent program and how they do it consistently. Because I will tell you, the drive-through program at Chick-fil-A, I mean, it is an outstanding thing. I mean, think about it. In Atlanta, when they were having trouble getting people through during the pandemic, I think it was to get swabs for COVID-19, they brought Chick-fil-A in to help make the lines go quicker through the drive-up lanes because it was taking forever to get through to get the COVID tests. And Chick-fil-A came in and cut that time in half because they certainly know how to run a drive-through and their hospitality is very good. The other thing that they do really well, and think about scale, is they do the 10% more. I think that's the other thing they've managed to scale. Because what other fast food, quick service restaurant will you find flowers on the table, people going around and getting refills, people bussing tables? It doesn't happen a lot in the quick service world. And Chick-fil-A has made that a part of their model. They've scaled it, and that's where they continue to win. Next on our list, the outsider, Steve Jobs. Now, this is a weird one on here, I know, because all the rest have really been around kind of hospitality. This one is really about the overall experience, too. So the Apple Store is really the story here, right? This computer company built one of the most profitable retail square footages on earth. They studied hotels, and they learned from them. and they really brought it in. When you think about it, as the Genius Bar is a concierge desk. They really do treat check-in like a hotel. They trained with the Ritz-Carlton. So they designed not for accident, but for absolute hospitality, for absolute service. Even though Jobs was an outsider to hospitality, this validates what we're talking about today. He proved that you can engineer the experience. Now, could there be a little more warmth in there every now and again? Absolutely. But the principles of great service, they can cross every line, and you can bring great hospitality into other areas of service and other industries. And that's been a thesis we've talked about for a really long time. And in fact, something here in Lakeland, Florida that the Great Chamber here is actually working with is how do we use all of the great hospitality leaders in Central Florida to inform the business decisions and service that non-hospitality brands provide. So, IT providers, or in this case, like an Apple store or the phone company or the cable company, how can they learn from the Disneys and the Ritz-Carltons and the Hiltons and the Chick-fil-A's to deliver even better service to their customers? And so that is really the principle that Jobs proved here, that when you borrow from really great hospitality pros, you can deliver amazing service even if that is not your core brand. So I bring this back around to my experiences at the Apple store. When I walk in there, it is top notch. They are on point. They have great displays. It is always clean. It's always very crisp looking. The team members are very knowledgeable. And I will tell you, when I've been standing there waiting for an Apple store to open up, I will watch them have really, really great pre-shift huddles. They are kings at the pre-shift huddle. They do a fantastic job. TSA and the Apple Store are great examples of companies that do a wonderful job with pre-shift huddles. So you study them. They absolutely do a great job. The next one, and probably the one that we're most familiar with in our day-to-day, Howard Schultz, Starbucks, the third place, right? I mean, Starbucks owned this experience. They sort of coined this whole idea of third place. He didn't sell coffee. He ended up being the one that sold the space between home and work, this third place. And he charged experience economy prices for it. I mean, if you think about what we pay for coffee now compared to before the Starbucks explosion, I mean, it's crazy. But again, we took a commodity that went to be a service, and it has been turned into a full-blown experience. It's the Disney of coffee shops, right? Now, it's been up and down, right? So pre-pandemic and post-pandemic, very different experiences. The onset of mobile ordering. There's a lot that's changed the landscape, and the competition that Starbucks is seeing from smaller vendors and smaller local baristas is a huge thing. So they are, again, trying to find their way in this. I think one of the greatest experiments they're in the middle of right now is trying to figure out what it means to satisfy the digital need. People want to be able to order and pick up online, but in the same breath, they're complaining that they're not getting the service and hospitality they used to, right? So really trying to figure out how do you maximize the handoff experience, because there is throughput pressure. Third places are thinning out. There are so many places now that have become third places for people that's not work and not home, but that other place to go work and be, that there's huge competition. I think about one of the things here in Central Florida where I live, it used to be a lot of people went to work at Starbucks. That was something a lot of people did, especially if you worked from home or wanted to get out of the office or change the scenery. Now people do crazy things, like they go work in hotels lobbies. They'll go over to Walt Disney World. I know a lot of folks that go over there and work. In fact, I myself have picked up and gone over and worked many days in either one of the parks or one of the hotels, just for someplace different and fun and inspiring to work. So that is the conundrum, but there is no doubt that Howard Schultz and the Starbucks third place experience absolutely changed the game when it came to creating an experience around a product and creating that sense of third place. There's one more person I want to mention, and he's sort of the hinge to this whole thing, and it's Ray Kroc. So an honorable mention to Ray Kroc of McDonald's. So Kroc didn't invent McDonald's. If you've seen the movie The Founder, then you know the story. But he saw the system and scaled it to an entire planet. He found a way to put standards in a way that nobody had at that moment in time. He really did take this system invented by the McDonald's brothers, and he exported it everywhere. It was a staggering achievement. And I would tell you one of the other things is scalability, food safety, systems, processes. He really does own the Gold Cup award for that. Now, he did optimize for speed. However, sometimes efficient started eating into hospitality. So the service model there did sort of go downhill a little bit. So it sort of brought it down the ladder a little bit. He was maybe a little closer to commodity, but he did it on such a scale that it was one of those things people became to count on. And even to today, where I know there are better burgers out there than McDonald's, but because I know what they are, because I trust them, and because they have an insane dedication to food safety, I trust them. When I'm traveling and don't know where to eat, or if I'm in an airport getting on a long plane, I will stop in and grab a McDonald's burger because I know it's going to be safe, I know what it's going to be, and I know it's going to be pretty good, right? Now, there are good McDonald's and not so good McDonald's. I get all of that. But generally speaking, you know what you're going to get. And from coast to coast, a Big Mac is a Big Mac is a Big Mac, and we owe Ray Kroc for that. So as brilliant as he was, though, he did show that we could go the other way, right? Stripping down the experience, chasing price, winning at scale. He was the first to slide back down the ladder and have success. Now, in the future, they're going to have to figure out, brands like KFC, like Taco Bell, like McDonald's are going to have to figure out what their place is going to be, because as we talked about in the last episode, being in the center of the K-shaped economy is going to be where you get crushed. And so there is going to be a danger there, but kudos to Ray Kroc for showing scale and how to drive systems and food safety globally. Really hats off to him for that, though. And so he does belong on this list, even as an honorable mention. So let's bring this together here. As we come to the finish line and we start to think about what's next and the so what, let's think about this for a minute. So the Titans have spent hundreds of years climbing up the ladder toward experience and toward transformation that we're going to talk about in a second. But here's the question. On our 250th birthday, why does so much of hospitality feel like we're sliding back down? If you think about it, right, the implementation of self-checkout, thinking about tip fatigue, thinking about donation prompts, thinking about excuses people make of like, oh, well, it's at the airport, or oh, it's at a sporting event, rather than is it good or is it not? So you have to think about the patterns we're seeing. And as an operator, you have to think about the real cost of becoming a commodity. And it comes back to what we talked about last week on the K-shaped economy. We really can't slide backward. And it's thinking about the next 10 years. It's thinking about the fork in the road. It's thinking about what are you going to be and how are you not going to get crushed. So AI and automation are the big levers. And if you do not want to get crushed as a commodity, you have to figure out how AI factors in. How does self-check and automation factor in? How will you free up your team for higher value tasks that drive experience as opposed to push you back toward a commodity and are just used for pure cost cutting? So it can't just be a way to drive efficiency and cost. It has to drive experience and hospitality. And so that is going to be where you're going to compete. And the other thing is around transformation, and this is the big one. So when you think about the level above experience that we're going to get to, it's going to be transformation. So it's going to move from commodity to product to service to experience to transformation, where guests don't just have a good time, they leave changed. That's the next 10 years for operators. It's about staging experiences that transform lives. Now, what does that look like? Well, think about the gym that doesn't just sell the workout. They sell you becoming fit. The university is selling who you are on the way out, charging for the outcome, not the visit. So think about that. If you're not guiding people to real change, you start to become a commodity. Because the fact that you can drive change, that there is an outcome, that's what can't be copied or discounted. Because AI can strip service absolutely down to a commodity. Or, as I said, it can free people up to do the deeply human work of changing how a customer or guest feels and who they become. The tool itself is neutral. The choice is what you have to design, and you have to decide as a business, how are you going to commit to this and drive transformation and outcomes for your customers and guests through the lens of experience and hospitality. So folks, that is our show. Remember, we are in the year of experiential hospitality, and it is America's 250th birthday. This is where strategy becomes experience through intentional design, people, and connection. That's truly your competitive advantage now and into the future. If you want to learn more, head on over and check out my book, Together We Serve, on Amazon. That's Together We Serve by Tony Johnson. You can get it on paperback, digital, and audiobook. Check it out today. But until next time, I've been Tony Johnson, your customer experience speaker, consultant, and trainer, reminding you to keep your customers at the center of everything you do, because that's where the most amazing things are possible. Thanks again for tuning in. Happy birthday, America, and I will talk to you next week.
This has been Customer Service Academy Radio with Tony Johnson. Tony is available to speak at your event, meeting, or workshop. Have a powerful customer-focused day.